a sound or you'll wake them in the deepest part of the ancient forest. The flickering candlelight illuminates the faded pages of a story. Hedgehog still sits and tells the stories that people dare not tell before.
The Sun-Eater'S Daughter. Prologue. The last summer. They called it the Great Remembering, that final, golden summer before the snows came. In the kingdom of Aethelgard, the sun was a constant, benevolent god, the fields groaned with wheat, and the rivers ran thick with salmon. It was a land of abundance, and its people, led by the wise King Alaric and Queen Alara, were joyful and loud. But deep in the northern glaciers, an ancient being stirred. It was the Jotunn, the frost heart, a primordial entity of cold and silence. For millennia, it had slept, its dreams of an ice-locked world mere whispers on the wind. The vibrant, noisy life of Aethelgard, its heat and its songs, grated against its essence like a physical pain. The summer's peak was an affront. So the Jotunn awoke. It did not send an army, it simply exhaled. Its breath was the winter tide, a wall of white that rolled south, swallowing the sun. It wasn't a blizzard, it was a new climate. The sky turned the color of lead, and the snow began to fall, a fine, perpetual ash that did not melt, but accumulated, day after day, year after year. The sun became a pale, cold coin, then a memory, then a myth. Aethelgard became Aethelfall, the fallen kingdom. The great forests became frozen catacombs. The rivers turned to roads of solid blue ice. The people, those who survived the first, terrible year, retreated into the mountain fastness of the sunken citadel, a cavernous fortress carved into the heart of the highest peak. They lived on geothermal vents, on lichen, on the dwindling stores of a world that was no more. They were led now by Lord Theron, once a minor noble, now the stern, unforgiving regent. He enforced a brutal doctrine, the weakness cull. The old, the sick, the injured, those who consumed more resources than they could provide, were cast out into the snow to appease the cold, to buy the strong another day. It was a terrible arithmetic, and it worked. The strong survived, and they learned to forget the warmth, for remembering was a luxury that felt too much like despair. Chapter 1. The Keeper of Embers. In the deepest, warmest chamber of the sunken citadel, next to a geothermal fissure that glowed with faint, orange light, lived Alara's legacy. Not a son or a daughter, for the royal line had ended with the king and queen, who had sacrificed themselves holding a mountain pass so others could flee. Their legacy was a girl they had found as a babe in the forest during the last summer, a child with hair the color of flame and a strange warmth to her skin. They named her Sol, after the sun god. Sol, now 17, was the keeper of the hearth. It was a hollow title. The great hearth in the citadel's hall was cold, its stones stained with soot from a fire that had died a decade ago. Her duty was not to tend a real flame, but a metaphorical one. She was the rememberer. While Lord Theron preached the doctrine of forgetting, Sol was tasked with the opposite. In a vast, leather-bound book, she recorded the stories of the before time. She drew pictures of apples, of green leaves, of the yellow sun. She wrote down the recipes for honey cakes and summer wine. She memorized the old songs, the poetry, the feel of grass underfoot. She was the living archive of a lost world, and for this, most of the citadel's inhabitants regarded her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Her memories were a dangerous indulgence. Her only friend was Kale, a young hunter whose eyes were as hard and grey as the ice he traversed. He believed in Theron's way. He participated in the culls. He saw Sol's remembrances as a beautiful, painful poison. "Why do you cling to it, Sol?" he asked her one day, sharpening his bone-tipped spear in her chamber. "The sun is gone. Warmth is a fantasy. All that matters is the next hunt, the next lump of coal. Remembering only makes the cold feel colder." "It's who we are, Kale," Sol replied, her finger tracing a drawing of a rose in her book. "If we forget the sun, we become as cold as the Jotunn itself. We're just surviving. We're not living." "There is no living," Kale said, his voice flat. "There is only survival. Theron understands that." That night, the cull was announced. Old Man Hemlock, the last storyteller, had succumbed to the lung rot. He was a drain on resources. Theron's decree was final. At dawn, he would be given a day's ration and cast out. Sol was devastated. Hemlock was her last link to the oral histories, the source of many tales in her book. That night, she sneaked into his cell-like room. The old man was shivering, his breath a ragged plume in the frigid air. "Child," he croaked, his eyes milky with age and illness, "you must not grieve for me. My story is told, but yours is not yet written." He grasped her hand, his skin like parchment. "The Jotunn, it cannot be fought with spears. It feeds on despair. It thrives in silence. Your warmth, Sol, it is not just memory, it is a weapon. He told her a story then, one he had never dared speak aloud. It was the story of her finding. The king and queen had not just found a babe in the woods. They had found her at the foot of a great, crystalline tree that pulsed with a gentle, golden light, a tree that radiated warmth in a circle of green grass, even as the first snows fell. You are not just a child of the sun, Sol, Hemlock whispered, his voice fading. You are a child of the last summer tree. You carry its ember in your heart. The Jotunn fears that ember. That is why the cold presses so hard on our walls. It is not for us. It is for you. With his last breath, he pressed a small, smooth object into her hand. It was a seed, warm to the touch, that glowed with a faint, internal light. Chapter 2, The Breath of the Frost Heart. The next morning, Hemlock was gone. Sol, clutching the hidden seed, felt a new resolve crystallize within her, as hard and sharp as an icicle. Theron's way was a slow suicide. She would not let her people forget their own hearts. She began her rebellion subtly. She would hum an old harvesting song while mending clothes. She would describe the taste of a ripe peach to the children, their eyes wide with wonder at the impossible concept. She painted a small, yellow sun on the wall of the main hall with pigment made from crushed sulfur crystals. Theron noticed. He summoned her to his austere chamber, a room devoid of any comfort, its walls lined with maps of their frozen prison. Your sentiments are a spark, Sol, he said, his voice echoing in the barren space. And a spark, in a tinder-dry forest, can start a conflagration. But here, in this tomb of ice, a spark only serves to show the survivors how deep the darkness is. It leads to rashness, to hope. And hope gets people killed. Without hope, we are already dead, my lord, Sol replied, standing straight. We are a bastion against the end, Theron countered, his eyes like chips of flint. We are the last ember of humanity. We must protect it by being ruthless, not by being brave. Your weapon of warmth is a fantasy. The only thing that matters is the cold, hard truth. He pointed a bony finger at her. Cease your remembrances. That is an order. Sol left, but she did not obey. That night, she went to the great, cold hearth. She placed the warm seed from hemlock deep within the pile of ancient, cold ash. She knelt and, thinking of every story, every song, every memory of warmth she possessed, she began to sing. It was a lullaby her mother, Queen Alara, had sung to her. A wisp of smoke curled up. Then a tiny, flickering tongue of gold and red flame sparked to life. It was no bigger than a thumb, but it was real. It was fire. A collective gasp went through the hall. People emerged from their alcoves, drawn by a sensation they had not felt in a decade. Genuine, radiant heat. They gathered around, tears freezing on their cheeks, their hands outstretched to the impossible miracle. But the citadel's walls were not the only thing that felt the change. Outside, in the perpetual blizzard, something shifted. The wind, which always howled, fell silent. The pressure in the air changed. The Jotunn had felt it, a pinprick of true warmth, a vibration of life that was an anathema to its being. It focused its will. It was not a conscious thought, but a primal reaction, like a body rejecting a virus. The following day, Kale's hunting party returned, but only Kale stumbled through the gates. He was half frozen, his face a mask of horror. The others, he rasped, collapsing by Sol's small fire. The cold, it came for them. It wasn't the wind. It was, alive. It shaped itself into claws and teeth of ice. It sought the warmth. It knew. He looked at Sol, and for the first time, his hard eyes held not accusation, but a dawning, terrible understanding. Hemlock's story was true. Her warmth was a weapon, and it had drawn the direct attention of the Frost Heart. Chapter 3, The Ashen Pact. Theron was furious. You see? He roared, his voice echoing through the citadel. Your defiance has cost us 5 of our best hunters. Your fire is a beacon, and it has called the wolf to our door. He ordered the fire extinguished. Guards advanced with buckets of ice. No, Sol cried, standing before the fragile flame. It's the only thing that makes us human. Humanity is a luxury we cannot afford. Theron shot back. It was Kale who stepped between them. He looked from Theron's rigid, despairing face to Sol's defiant, hopeful one. He had seen the ice monsters. He had felt the Jotunn's focused malice. He knew now that survival was not enough. Hiding in the dark was only delaying the inevitable. The Regent is right, Kale said, his voice low. The hall fell silent. Hiding is no longer an option. The Jotunn knows we are here. It will not stop until this spark, and the girl who carries it, are extinguished. He turned to Sol. But the Keeper is also right. If we put out this fire, we might as well open the gates and walk into the storm. We will have already surrendered. He faced Theron. My lord, you have kept us alive. For that, we owe you everything. But the strategy must change. We cannot just endure. We must fight. Fight. Theron laughed, a hollow, broken sound. Fight a glacier. A winter. How? With her, Kale said, pointing to Sol. The Jotunn fears her warmth. We must use it. A desperate plan was formed. It was not a plan of battle, but of pilgrimage. Sol, protected by Kale and a volunteer guard, would journey north, to the source of the cold, the Jotunn's heart, located in the great glacial valley the hunters called the Frost Tomb. They would take the Ember with them. It is a suicide mission, Theron stated, but there was no force behind his words. He saw the new light in the people's eyes. The fire had given him something more precious than warmth, a purpose. It is a chance, Sol said. A chance to remember what it means to be alive, even if it's only for a moment. They prepared to leave. Sol carefully took the still burning ember from the hearth and placed it inside a special lantern forged from a polished Heliodor crystal, which seemed to amplify its light and heat. She packed her book of memories. The volunteers, including Kale, were the best of the citadel, their faces set with a grim determination they had not worn in years. As they passed through the great gates, Theron stood watching. As Sol passed, he spoke, so softly only she could hear. The stories, your mother, she would have been proud. It was the first kind word he had spoken in a decade. Chapter 4, The Glacier's Heart. The journey into the Frost Tomb was a descent into a new kind of hell. The air was so cold it felt solid, scraping the lungs with every breath. The snow was not soft, but a fine, crystalline dust that abraded the skin. There was no sound but the moan of the wind, which now felt like the voice of the Jotunn itself, whispering of oblivion. The Jotunn was aware of their presence. It tested them. It created illusions, mirage of the sunken citadel, warm and inviting, just off their path. It whispered with the voices of their dead loved ones, calling them to rest. Two of their party, driven mad by despair, walked into the blizzard and vanished. Sol's lantern was their only solace. Its golden light pushed back the oppressive gloom, creating a small bubble of reality in the nightmare. They huddled around it at night, and Sol would read from her book, her voice a fragile weapon against the silence. She read of buzzing bees and warm rain, and for a few moments, the cold would seem to retreat, shamed by the vividness of her memories. Finally, they reached the heart of the Frost Tomb. It was a vast, circular plain of blue ice, unnaturally smooth. In the center stood the Jotunn. It was not a giant, but a phenomenon. A swirling, silent vortex of absolute cold, a column of condensed winter that pulsed with a pale, blue-white light. It had no face, no form, but they could feel its consciousness, an immense, ancient, and utterly alien will that desired only stillness, silence, and an end to the irritating noise of life. This was the Frost Heart. As they approached, the temperature plummeted. The air crackled, and the ice at their feet began to writhe, forming into the same clawed monsters that had slain the hunters. The guards readied their weapons, but their spears shattered against the crystalline bodies. It's no use. Kale yelled over the rising wind. We can't fight them. Sol knew what she had to do. This was not a battle of strength, but of essence. Hemlock had said it fed on despair. Her warmth, her memories, were the antithesis of its being. She stepped forward, holding the Heliodor lantern high. She poured every ounce of her will, every memory of warmth and light and life, into the tiny ember. The lantern flared. A wave of golden light, visible and tangible, erupted from her, pushing back the monsters. They hissed and recoiled, their forms becoming unstable in the face of such potent, concentrated memory. She walked towards the Frost Heart. The cold was a physical wall, trying to stop her. It whispered into her mind, showing her images of her own death, of the citadel falling, of Kale turning to ice before her. It offered her the peace of nothingness. But Sol had spent her life remembering. She did not give in. She thought of the sun on her face. She thought of her mother's song. She thought of the taste of honey, the color of a rose, the sound of laughter. She reached the swirling vortex of the Frost Heart. The cold was so intense it was burning her. The lantern in her hand was flickering, the ember dying under the assault. This is not your world. She screamed into the silence, her voice a tiny, brave crack in the eternity of cold. You cannot have it. With a final, desperate act, she did not throw the lantern. She opened it. She took the glowing, warm seed, the ember of the last summer tree, and she pressed it directly into the heart of the swirling vortex. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sound like a million glaciers cracking filled the air. The pale blue light of the Jotunn was infected with strands of gold. The vortex shuddered, its perfect, silent order disrupted by the chaotic, vibrant energy of life. The frost heart did not explode. It convulsed. It was being poisoned by the very thing it sought to destroy. The golden light spread, a web of summer through the ice. The swirling slowed, then stilled. The Jotunn was not dead. Such primordial forces could not be killed. But it was, wounded, asleep again. The perpetual, magical winter that had gripped the land was broken. The blizzard ceased. For the first time in 20 years, the snow simply stopped falling. Epilogue, the thaw. The journey back was different. The air was still cold, bitterly so, but it was a natural cold. The malevolent intelligence was gone. The sky, while still grey, was no longer oppressive. When they returned to the sunken citadel, they found the people outside, staring up in wonder at the silent, snowless sky. Theron stood among them, his head bowed. When he saw Sol, alive and carrying the extinguished but unbroken lantern, he knelt. She did not want his fealty, she wanted to rebuild. The great thaw was slow. It took years. The glaciers did not vanish overnight, but they receded. Rivers began to flow, tentatively, under the ice. Hardy, cold-resistant plants began to poke through the snow. Sol and Kale ruled together, not as queen and consort, but as guides. They moved the people out of the sunken citadel and began to build anew, using the stones of the old world. Sol's book of memories became their blueprint. They planted the seeds they had saved, and to their astonishment, some of them grew. The fire in the great hearth was relit, and this time, it was fed with wood from the first new growth trees. It was never allowed to go out. Sol often journeyed to the frost tomb, which was now just a very cold, high valley. The Jotunn slept, a presence of deep cold beneath the ice. The seed of the last summer tree was gone, consumed in the battle. But sometimes, on the anniversary of the day she faced the frost heart, Sol would find a single, perfect, frost-resistant flower blooming at the very spot where she had made her stand. It was not a victory of summer over winter. It was a balance. The world was scarred, and the cold would always be a part of it. But life had found a way back. They would always remember the cold, but they no longer had to live in its shadow. They had learned that some fires, once lit, are worth any price to keep burning, for they are the only thing that stands between a people and the long, frozen night.
If you feel a chill down your spine, don't worry. They're just standing behind you, listening with you. Thank you for daring to enter the world of fairy tales of Nim. We'll see you again next night, if you're still around.